It was a quiet afternoon when my son, Colin, handed me a glass of water. His face was calm, and his smile was warm, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something had shifted. That same morning, I had uncovered something that would change everything. My son, the one I had raised and loved with every ounce of my being, had taken out a life insurance policy in my name. A policy so large that it made me freeze when I first saw the document. And on top of that, there were plans for an accident. I took the glass of water from Colin's hand, but I wasn't really looking at him. My mind kept replaying the events of the past few days, trying to make sense of it all. Why would he do this? What had happened to my son? I had always believed that love, sacrifice, and care would make him appreciate me. But now, I wasn't so sure. I had spent years, no, decades, giving him everything. He was my world, my pride, and yet, it seemed that all my love had been for nothing. Colin wasn't the man I thought he was. The realization hit me like a cold slap to the face, and for a brief moment, I almost couldn't breathe. But I couldn't let him see how shaken I was. I had to act normal, had to pretend nothing was wrong, at least for now. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile as I took a sip of the water. My hand trembled slightly, but I hoped he didn't notice. Colin, as always, didn't seem to be paying much attention to me. He was too busy with his phone, his eyes glued to the screen. I watched him for a moment, trying to make sense of what I had discovered. He had been so distant lately, especially after he married Vanessa. The visits had become rarer, and when he did come over, he was always in a rush. A part of me had hoped it was just the busyness of life, but deep down, I had known something was off. Now, it all made sense. He was changing. No, he had already changed. The sudden realization that my son had become a stranger was more painful than I had imagined. The distance between us had never been so wide, and now I knew that my love for him had been mistaken for weakness. I had let him use me, let him take advantage of my unconditional love. And for what? So he could secure his future by planning my death? Later that week, Colin and Vanessa came over. It was a Saturday, and the sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow over the living room. They brought gifts, flowers for me, a small potted plant, and some expensive-looking wine. I smiled politely, but the gifts only made the betrayal hurt more. They were trying to keep up the pretense that everything was normal. I could see it in their eyes, the way they looked at me with their fake smiles. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but everything about their visit felt calculated. "Mom, we were thinking," Colin began, his voice low and sweet, like he was trying to convince me of something. "It would be better for you if you moved in with us. We could take care of you, and you wouldn't have to worry about anything." Vanessa nodded along, her smile wide but stiff, as if she was rehearsing it. I didn't answer right away. I studied them both, looking for any sign of sincerity, but all I saw was a well-crafted act. There was something behind their words that didn't sit right with me. The offer seemed too perfect, too convenient. If I moved in with them, they would have full access to my finances, my home, my life. And I realized, then, that this wasn't an offer born out of love. This was a plan to get me out of the way, possibly permanently. After a moment of silence, I nodded. "I'll think about it," I said, trying to hide the unease creeping in my chest. But as soon as I agreed, I could feel the shift. Their smiles widened, but it wasn't the smile of people who cared about me. It was the smile of people who had just won a victory. The victory wasn't mine, though. It was theirs. As the evening went on, I noticed more strange behaviors. Colin and Vanessa were acting as if they were in a hurry, moving quickly, constantly checking the time. Their gestures were sharp, their conversations brief. It was as if they couldn't wait to get out of the house, like there was something more important waiting for them. And then Colin dropped a bombshell. "You know, Mom, it might be better if we put the house in my name. You know, for tax purposes, it's easier that way." My stomach twisted. The words sounded so casual, like it was the most natural thing in the world, but I could feel the weight of them. The hidden meaning behind those few words. If they controlled the house, they controlled everything. My life, my assets, everything. I didn't want to let myself believe that Colin would go this far, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. The plan was more elaborate than I had thought. The days passed slowly, and with each one, the unease in my gut grew stronger. Colin and Vanessa's visits became more frequent, but every time they came over, I felt more like an outsider in my own home. They'd bring more gifts. Always sweet, always thoughtful, but there was something behind the gestures that made my skin crawl. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, the faint sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen where they were preparing dinner. I was lost in thought, my mind racing with possibilities. What were they really up to? What was their endgame? I had always been a trusting person, always believed the best in people, especially my son. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My gut told me that they were waiting for something, waiting for the right moment to strike. I wasn't sure how I knew, but the signs were everywhere. The way they looked at me now was different. It wasn't the look of concern or love. It was something colder, more calculating. They were waiting for the moment when I would be too weak, too dependent. They wanted me out of the way, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. The days felt like weeks, each one heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls around me were closing in. I continued to watch Colin and Vanessa carefully, but they were always so careful in how they acted around me. It was as if they knew I was suspicious, and yet, they carried on with their performance as if nothing had changed. Colin, who once couldn't have been more eager to visit, now came only when he had to. The short, polite conversations we had seemed hollow, and I could no longer ignore the sense of detachment in his words. He talked about work, about his new investments, about Vanessa's supposed pregnancy, which I later discovered was a complete fabrication, but he never talked about me anymore. He never asked how I was doing, what I needed, or even if I was happy. All his talk was about business, about growing the family empire, but it had never felt less like family to me. Vanessa, always with that polite smile, seemed to be the perfect accomplice. She was constantly busy, always having appointments or errands to run, and whenever I tried to engage her in meaningful conversation, she either deflected or made excuses to leave. The gap between us was growing, and I couldn't help but feel like I was becoming invisible to them. One evening, Colin invited me to dinner. It was a quiet night, and I thought perhaps this would be an opportunity to talk openly, maybe even confront him about what I'd discovered. I had no expectations, but the flicker of hope that he might come clean stayed with me. We sat around the dinner table, the soft glow of candlelight casting shadows across the room. Vanessa was unusually quiet tonight, her eyes darting between Colin and me, clearly uncomfortable. Colin, on the other hand, was his usual charming self, but there was something forced about his cheerfulness. "So, Mom," Colin said, breaking the silence, "have you thought any more about moving in with us? We really think it'll be good for you. You could help us with the house, and we'd take care of everything." I couldn't hide the dismay that crept across my face. I wasn't sure if I was more frustrated by his offer or the fact that he was continuing with this charade, but I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I stared at him, searching for any hint of sincerity, any crack in the perfect facade. There was nothing. "I've been thinking about it, Colin," I said slowly, watching his face closely, "but I'm not sure that I'm ready to give up my independence. I've worked hard to make this home mine, and I'm not so sure it's the right time to make such a big change." His smile faltered just for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something, frustration, maybe, before it was replaced by that same well-practiced expression. "I understand, Mom," he said quickly, "but think of the benefits. We could be together all the time. We wouldn't have to worry about you being alone, and besides, Vanessa and I are planning to make some big changes around here." Vanessa's eyes shifted nervously, and she cleared her throat. "You know, Colin's right. It would be better for everyone if we were all under the same roof. We could save on costs. Anne, I've got it covered," I interjected before she could continue. "I don't need anyone to take care of me. Thank you very much. I'm doing just fine on my own." The conversation moved on after that, but I could tell something had shifted in the air. The tension was palpable. I could feel them both eyeing me more carefully now, their every move more calculated, as if I were a piece on a chessboard, and they were deciding where to place me next. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words they'd said to me replayed in my mind over and over. But it wasn't just what they said, it was the way they said it. The way they looked at me as if they were sizing me up. I wasn't just their mother. I was something to be dealt with, something to be handled. I could feel the distance between us growing, like a chasm that was too wide to cross. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. It wasn't like me to snoop around. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. I had to know more. I searched through Colin's room while they were out running errands, trying to find anything that would explain their strange behavior. And there it was, hidden in a drawer beneath a pile of papers, an official-looking envelope with the logo of an insurance company. I took a deep breath as I opened the envelope. My hands were trembling. The document inside was even worse than I had imagined, a life insurance policy. But not just any policy. This one had my name on it. And the payout was huge. Too huge. I skimmed through the fine print, my heart sinking with every word. The policy was structured in such a way that it would pay out in the event of an accident. With certain conditions, of course. And as I reached the end of the document, I found it, the clause that sent a chill down my spine. In the case of accidental death or severe injury, the policyholder's designated beneficiary shall be entitled to the payout. I felt my legs go weak as I sat down on the bed. My mind raced, the pieces clicking together. This wasn't just about me moving in with them. This was about Colin and Vanessa planning my death for money. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was reading. Why? What had I done to deserve this? How could my own flesh and blood, my son, be plotting something so vile? The next morning, I decided to confront Colin. He and Vanessa had just returned from a trip to the grocery store, and I was sitting in the living room, holding the insurance document in my lap. As they walked in, I felt a surge of anger not just at them, but at myself for ever letting things get to this point. Colin, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fury and hurt, I found something I need to talk to you about. He froze in his tracks, his face going pale. Vanessa, who had been busy unpacking groceries, paused too, sensing the tension. What is it, Mom? Colin asked, his voice too calm, almost too rehearsed. I handed him the document. Explain this to me. He glanced at the paper, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Vanessa stepped closer, trying to intervene, but I held my ground. I don't know what you're talking about, Colin began, his voice low, but the words were too rehearsed, too practiced. It's just an insurance policy. I thought you'd feel more secure with it, but I wasn't buying it. The smile, the reassurance, it was all a mask. And now the mask had cracked. I knew the truth. Tell me the truth. Colin, are you planning to kill me? The room fell silent, and the look in Colin's eyes told me everything I needed to know. I had never seen Colin look so uncertain. His usually confident posture seemed to crumble in that moment. For a few seconds, he just stood there, staring at the insurance document in my hands, as if he could somehow make it disappear by sheer willpower. But the truth had already been laid bare. The betrayal was undeniable. Vanessa, who had been hovering at the edge of the room, stepped forward, her eyes darting nervously between Colin and me. Her voice was shaky, but she tried to keep it steady. Mom, it's not what you think, she said, almost pleading. Colin was just trying to help. He thought that, well, that it would ease your mind. You're getting older, and we just wanted to make sure you're protected. Protected? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. You're trying to protect me by putting a life insurance policy in my name and planning for an accident? That's not protection. That's a plan to get rid of me. Colin opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he looked at Vanessa, as if silently pleading with her to fix the situation, to somehow talk me down. But Vanessa only looked at the floor, her face flushed with guilt. I could feel the anger boiling inside me, hot and dangerous. For years, I had trusted them. I had given them everything, supported them through their struggles, stood by them through thick and thin. And now, this is how they repaid me? You don't get to lie to me anymore, I said, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with the bitter sting of betrayal. I raised you, Colin, I loved you, and this is how you repay me? For a brief moment, Colin seemed to shrink under the weight of my words. The cocky, self-assured son I had once known was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't even meet my gaze. Vanessa, on the other hand, tried to act like it was all still under control, but I saw the cracks in her demeanor. They had underestimated me, misjudged my ability to see through their lies. Colin began, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. Mom, I just thought we needed to secure our future. You're not getting any younger, and I thought we could. Secure your future? I interrupted, barely able to control the fury rising within me. You mean secure your inheritance, don't you? You didn't want to take care of me, you wanted my money. You've been plotting this from the beginning. Vanessa shook her head frantically, but the evidence was all there. The policy, the plans, the constant attempts to manipulate me into their control. I had been nothing more than a means to an end. That's not true, she snapped, her voice rising in frustration. You don't understand. We were just looking out for you. For all of us. This isn't what it looks like. But I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't. All I could see was the cold, calculating greed in their eyes, the emptiness behind their smiles. For the first time in my life, I realized how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. I was expendable. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, Colin's, so full of empty promises, and Vanessa's, her own greed disguised as concern. They thought they could manipulate me, control me, and I had let them. I had been blind, so wrapped up in my love for Colin that I never saw the monster he had become. I thought back to all the times he had asked for money, the times he came to me with sob stories about his financial struggles. How many of those were lies? How many times had I enabled him to dig himself deeper, all because I couldn't say no to my son? And then there was the most painful thought of all, what if I hadn't caught them? What if I had never discovered the insurance policy? Would they have gone through with it? Would they have actually killed me, taken everything I had, and walked away scot-free? I felt sick to my stomach. My own flesh and blood, my son and his wife, had been plotting my death. They didn't care about me, didn't care about our family. They were just after what I could give them, what they could take from me. I had been a fool. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I didn't know how, but I was going to make sure they paid for what they'd done. I was no longer their pawn, their fool. I was going to take control of this situation. But I couldn't act recklessly. I had to be smart. I had to play my cards carefully. The first step was to confront them, but not yet. Not in the way they were expecting. I needed them to believe everything was still under control, that I was still the weak, trusting mother who would fall for their tricks. I started preparing. I went through all the documents, the bank accounts, everything they could use against me. I made copies of everything and hid them where they wouldn't find them. I also made sure to put some distance between myself and them. I needed to be cautious, but I also needed to start laying the groundwork for my revenge. There was one thing I knew for sure, I would not go down without a fight. They had underestimated me, and now, it was time to turn the tables. It wasn't long before they tried to push their plan further. Colin and Vanessa came over the next day, acting as if nothing had happened. They spoke in their usual calm tones, trying to make it seem like their earlier confrontation had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. But I could see through their facade. They were testing the waters, seeing if I would back down, if I would forgive them. They offered to help around the house, to make things easier for me, but I wasn't fooled. They were trying to get closer, trying to see how much I had figured out. I didn't say much, I simply nodded, playing along, pretending that everything was normal. But inside, I was preparing. I was getting ready for the next move. Days passed, and I kept to myself, pretending everything was fine. Colin and Vanessa continued their charade, offering help around the house, bringing me small gifts, even making sure to check in on me at least once a day. But I could see through it all. Every act of kindness felt rehearsed, too calculated. They thought they were outsmarting me, but they had no idea how deeply I had begun to dig into their plans. At night, I would lie awake, unable to shut off the thoughts spinning in my head. How could I outmaneuver them? How could I make sure they paid for what they were planning without getting myself caught in the crossfire? I had to be careful, smart, and above all, patient. It wasn't just about the insurance policy anymore. It was about my own survival. If they were willing to go this far, who knew how far they would take it? Something shifted in their behavior, though it wasn't immediate, but I could feel it. Vanessa, in particular, seemed more distant. Her bright smile, which had always seemed so genuine, now felt forced. There was a quiet desperation in her eyes whenever she looked at me, as if she was trying to cover up something. And Colin, although he still came by every few days, was less eager to engage. He no longer spoke of helping me with anything. Instead, he kept trying to draw me into long conversations about things that didn't matter, his latest work project, his thoughts on the market, random observations about the weather. It was like they were starting to realize that I knew. They were watching me now, just as closely as I had been watching them. One evening, I finally decided to confront them again. I could feel it in my gut. This time, I needed to push them, see how they would react under pressure. I had waited long enough. It was time to take control of the situation, to make them believe they were still in control while I made my move. I invited them over for dinner. The house was quiet, and the smell of homemade pasta lingered in the air. The night felt strangely peaceful, like the calm before a storm. I was careful with the conversation, making sure not to push them too hard too soon. I didn't want to scare them off, but I needed them to know that I wasn't afraid anymore. "So, how's the pregnancy going, Vanessa?" I asked, keeping my tone light, as if I were just making small talk. Her eyes widened for a split second before she recovered. "Oh, it's going fine," she replied, a little too quickly. "Just, the usual tiredness and cravings." I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. "That's good," I said, nodding. "But Colin, I was thinking about what you said the other day, about moving in here, and I've changed my mind. I think it's time." For a moment, Colin's face tightened, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "Really? That's great to hear, Mom. We were just talking about how much easier it would be if you were with us. You'd be more comfortable." "Right," I said slowly. "And I was also thinking about what you mentioned, about putting the house in your name. You're right, it would help with the taxes." Vanessa's eyes darted nervously between Colin and me, but I could see her trying to maintain her composure. Colin's smile faltered for a moment, and I caught a glimpse of the anxiety he was hiding. This was it, the moment when everything would come crashing down. I wasn't going to let them take control of my life anymore. I was going to make sure they knew I had seen through their lies. Colin, I continued, my voice a little colder now. "I've been thinking about that life insurance policy too, and I'm glad to see you're taking care of things. But I need to ask, what exactly do you think would happen if I were to suddenly disappear?" Colin's face went pale, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Vanessa, too, was visibly shaken. The air in the room grew thick with tension. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Colin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm talking about the policy," I said calmly. "The one you've taken out in my name. The one that would pay out in the event of an accident." For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the kitchen appliances. I could see the panic starting to build in their faces. They didn't know how to react. I had caught them. "You're not as clever as you think you are," I said, my voice steady. "I know everything. I know about the policy. I know about your plans, and I know what you were planning to do to me." Vanessa's mask finally slipped. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane," she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about." But I could see the fear in her eyes, the desperation. They both realized they had underestimated me. They thought I was just some helpless old woman they could control, but I was far from that. "Don't try to play the victim, Vanessa," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've been complicit in this whole thing. You've been lying to me from the start." Vanessa stammered, but Colin cut her off. He was the one who was finally breaking. His face was flushed, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his glass of water. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "We didn't mean for it to get this far." "Oh, but it did," I said quietly, leaning forward. "And now we're going to deal with it. I'm done being the one you manipulate. You wanted my house, my money, my life. Well, you're not getting any of it." For a brief moment, the room felt utterly still. I could see the panic starting to set in, especially in Colin. He had always been the one who thought ahead, who was calculating, but now, he was like a deer caught in the headlights. He wasn't in control anymore. I could feel my heart racing, adrenaline surging through my veins. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I would take my life back, when I would make sure they paid for what they had done to me. The tension in the room was suffocating. I could see Colin and Vanessa scrambling for their words, their minds working overtime to come up with some sort of excuse, some kind of explanation, but there was no getting around it anymore. They had been exposed, and no matter how they tried to twist the truth, the damage had been done. Colin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers tapping against the edge of his glass in a nervous rhythm. Vanessa, on the other hand, had gone completely silent. Her eyes were downcast, avoiding mine as if I might lash out at her. She seemed to be weighing her options, perhaps trying to calculate the best way to salvage what little was left of their plan. I wasn't going to let them talk their way out of this. They had already taken enough from me, and I wasn't going to give them a chance to manipulate the situation any further. Don't bother with the excuses, Colin, I said, my voice sharp. I know exactly what you were planning. The policy, the accident, the way you've been treating me for months, it's all so clear now. Colin opened his mouth as if to speak, but his words caught in his throat. He looked at Vanessa, then back at me, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to think of something to say that would make this all go away. You really thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you? I continued, my voice steady, but the anger underneath was impossible to hide. You've been lying to me for so long, and I was blind to it, but not anymore. Now, it's my turn. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice shaking. Please, Mom, we were just trying to help. You've been so distant lately, and we thought we were doing the right thing. We didn't want you to worry about your future. Help, I repeated bitterly. You're trying to tell me that putting a policy on my life, planning for me to disappear, was helping me? That's not help, Vanessa. That's manipulation, and I'm done with it. There was a long silence. I could see the guilt and shame in their faces, but it wasn't enough. They had gone too far, and now they had to pay the price. I had been kind, I had been understanding, but that kindness had been taken for granted. No more. I'm going to make sure that this all gets sorted out, I said, standing up slowly from the table. The house, the policy, everything. I'm not leaving it in your hands anymore. And neither of you is getting away with this. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been planning. Vanessa looked like she was about to protest, but I held up my hand to stop her. Don't bother. You've said enough. I'm not interested in hearing your excuses anymore. I turned to Colin, who was still sitting there, looking defeated. You've always thought you could get away with anything because I loved you. But I was wrong. I've been nothing more than a stepping stone to you, and I'm done being your fool. For the first time, Colin didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me otherwise. Instead, he just sat there, his shoulders slumped, as if the fight had completely drained from him. He looked like a man who had lost everything, his plan, his mother's trust, his sense of control, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to realize the gravity of what he had done. I didn't waste any time after that. I knew what I had to do. The first step was to take control of the house, legally and completely. I needed to make sure that there was no question that this was my property, and they wouldn't be able to pull any more schemes on me. That night, I began to gather all the necessary documents. I went through every file, every piece of paper that had anything to do with the house, the bank accounts, the insurance policies. I made sure everything was in order. If Colin and Vanessa thought they could swindle me out of what was mine, they had another thing coming. But it wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about sending a message. I wasn't just going to take back control, I was going to make sure they knew that I was never going to be a victim again. The more I worked through the paperwork, the more I realized how deep their plan had gone. They had been systematically trying to isolate me, wear me down, make me doubt myself. But now, I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let them win. The next day, I called Colin and Vanessa over to discuss things. They came reluctantly, their expressions still strained and wary. I could tell they were trying to figure out what I was going to do, but they didn't know the half of it. I've been thinking, I said, sitting across from them, my voice calm but firm, and I've decided to make some changes. The house is mine, I'm transferring it all to my name, and you will not be getting anything from me. The policy is cancelled, and I'm in contact with the insurance company. As for you two, I let the words hang in the air, letting them stew in the silence. I don't want to see either of you here again, I said, my tone cold. You've taken enough from me. Now, it's time for you to leave. Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, but Colin placed a hand on her arm, silencing her. He didn't look at me. He didn't say anything. It was as if he had finally realized that he had lost. And maybe, just maybe, he understood that I wasn't the fool he had thought me to be. That evening, as I stood in the kitchen, staring out at the backyard, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't over, far from it. There were still battles to be fought, but I had taken the first step in regaining control of my life. The house felt different now. It was no longer a place where I had been taken advantage of. where my kindness had been exploited. It was mine again, and as the sun set behind the trees, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was going to write my own story from here on out.